Somewhere right now, someone is trying to provoke you. A co-worker who takes credit for your work. A family member who twists every conversation into a competition. A friend who smiles while quietly cutting you down. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people lose to them. Not because they're weak, but because nobody ever taught them what to say in that exact moment. Today that changes. You're about to learn 10 responses so calm, so unshakable, that toxic people won't just back down. They'll never see you as an easy target again. These aren't tricks. They are 2,000-year-old weapons, forged by the Stoics and refined by people who learned the hard way that silence and composure can cut deeper than any insult ever could. Stay until the end, because response number 7 is the one that changes everything. And almost nobody uses it. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the home for timeless philosophy, built for modern life. If you've ever felt outnumbered by people who thrive on drama, manipulation, or control, you are exactly where you need to be. Every video on this channel exists to hand you the mental tools that emperors, slaves, and philosophers used to stay unbreakable in a chaotic world. If that sounds like something you need, hit subscribe now, because what you're about to hear might be the most useful 10 minutes you spend all week. Let's be honest about something nobody likes to admit. Toxic people are not always obvious villains. They rarely announce themselves. They don't wear a sign. Instead, they disguise themselves as the joking co-worker, the concerned relative, the friend who just tells it like it is. And because they're so close to us, their words land harder than any strangers ever could. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world during his lifetime, began nearly every single morning bracing for this exact reality. In his private journal, which we now call Meditations, he wrote himself a kind of pep talk before facing the world. He reminded himself that he would meet people who were ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, jealous, and surly. Not maybe, not occasionally, every day. And instead of dreading it, he prepared for it like a soldier prepares for battle, calmly, deliberately, without fear. That's the first shift we need to make together today. Toxic behavior is not a personal attack that catches you off guard. It's weather. It's traffic. It's an entirely predictable feature of living around other imperfect humans. Once you expect it, it loses its power to shock you. And once it can't shock you, it can't control you. Think about how differently we treat expected discomfort versus unexpected discomfort. A sudden downpour when you left your umbrella at home feels like a small, personal betrayal from the universe. But if you checked the forecast that morning and packed accordingly, the exact same rain becomes background noise, mildly inconvenient, nothing more. Marcus Aurelius was doing precisely this every morning with people. He wasn't being pessimistic or cynical about humanity. He was simply refusing to be blindsided by something he already knew. From decades of ruling an empire was coming. Most of us do the opposite. We wake up expecting fairness, kindness, and good faith from everyone we encounter, and then feel personally wronged, disoriented, even a little betrayed, every single time someone fails to meet that expectation. That disorientation is exactly where toxic people gain their leverage, and in the split second where you're too shocked to think clearly, they've already landed their comment and moved on, leaving you to clean up the emotional wreckage on your own time. The moment you stop being shocked, that window closes. You see the comment coming, you recognize the pattern, and you respond from a place of calm preparation instead of scrambling reaction. But knowing this isn't enough. You also need the actual words, the responses, that turn a toxic exchange from something that drains you into something that reveals instantly who has the real power in the room. So let's get into it. 10 responses, real Stoic principles behind each one, and real stories of people who used them, some from history, some from everyday life, to reclaim their peace. Before we start, I want you to do one thing for me. If even one of these 10 hits home, drop a comment with the number. It helps me know which lessons matter most to you, and honestly, it's incredible to see this community recognize itself in these stories. Let's begin. Response number 1. The silent pause. Picture this. You're in a meeting. Someone makes a snide comment about your work in front of everyone. Not enough to be obviously rude, just enough to make you feel small. Every instinct in your body wants to snap back immediately. Your chest tightens. Your face flushes. Words are already forming in your throat. Here is the first response, and it isn't a sentence at all. It's silence. A deliberate, unhurried pause before you say anything. Epictetus, a man who spent years of his life enslaved before becoming one of history's great philosophers, taught something that feels almost impossible in the heat of the moment. Between the insult and your reaction, there is a gap, and in that gap lies your entire freedom. He said that it's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about those events. The co-worker's comment is just noise in the air until you decide what it means and how you'll respond to it. When you pause, really pause, 3 or 4 full seconds of silence while you hold eye contact, something remarkable happens. The toxic person who was expecting an emotional reaction to feed on gets nothing. Their comment just hangs there awkwardly in open air. Silence has a strange power. It makes the other person's words sound louder and pettier than they ever intended, simply because nothing rushes in to cover them up. There was a woman named Eleanor, a project manager at a mid-sized company, who told a story about a colleague who constantly undermined her in meetings. For months she'd respond quickly, trying to defend herself, and it never worked. It only escalated things. One day, exhausted from trying, she simply didn't respond right away. She let a comment sit in silence for a long, uncomfortable 4 seconds before calmly moving the meeting forward. The room noticed, not because she said something clever, but because she said nothing at all, and that nothing spoke volumes. The colleague, expecting a reaction, looked visibly rattled by not getting one. That silence became her signature move. People started to notice that undermining her simply didn't land anymore. The lesson here isn't to bottle up your emotions. It's to separate the moment of provocation from the moment of response. Marcus Aurelius called this the ruling faculty, the part of you that observes your own reactions before acting on them. When you master that gap, you're no longer a puppet reacting to strings. You become the one holding them. If you've ever felt that urge to snap back instantly and instead wished you'd waited, you're not alone. Tell me about it in the comments. It's one of the hardest habits to build, but also one of the most transformative. It helps to understand why the pause works on a physiological level, not just a philosophical one. When we're provoked, the body floods with stress hormones almost instantly. Adrenaline, cortisol, preparing us for a fight that, in a boardroom or a living room, we're never actually going to have. This is the same ancient survival system that once helped our ancestors escape predators, now firing off because someone made a snarky comment about a spreadsheet. The physical sensation is real, but the danger is almost never real. A few seconds of silence gives that initial chemical surge time to crest and begin to fall, so that whatever you say next comes from a calmer, clearer part of you, rather than the panicked reactive part. This is precisely what Epictetus meant when he distinguished between impressions and judgments. An impression is the raw, immediate sensation, the sting of the comment, the flush of anger. A judgment is the story we quickly attach to that sensation. This person is trying to humiliate me. I have to defend myself right now or I'll look weak. The pause interrupts the automatic leap from impression to judgment. It gives you back the choice that in the heat of the moment feels like it isn't there at all. And once you've practiced this enough times, the pause stops feeling like restraint and starts feeling like clarity. You're not holding yourself back. You're simply seeing the situation accurately before you act on it. Response number 2. That's an interesting way to see it. Toxic people often speak in absolutes designed to box you in. You always do this. You never think of anyone but yourself. Everyone agrees with me on this. These statements aren't really about truth. They're about control. They're designed to make you defend yourself, which keeps you on the back foot and them in charge of the conversation. The second response short-circuits this entirely. That's an interesting way to see it. Notice what this sentence does. It doesn't agree. It doesn't argue. It doesn't escalate. It simply acknowledges that the other person has a perspective without accepting it as fact and without handing them the emotional reaction they were fishing for. Seneca wrote extensively about the futility of arguing with people who aren't interested in truth, only in winning. In one of his letters, he described watching public arguments where the loudest, angriest voice was mistaken for the most correct one, when in reality, volume and certainty are not the same as wisdom. He advised that the wise person doesn't need to win every verbal battle, because trying to win a battle that was rigged from the start is its own kind of defeat. Think about a family gathering where an uncle insists on an aggressive political opinion and challenges everyone at the table to disagree with him. The old you might have taken the bait, spending the next 20 minutes in a circular argument that ruins the mood of the entire dinner and leaves you angry for hours afterward. The new you, armed with this phrase, simply says, "That's an interesting way to see it," and reaches for the potatoes. The conversation, deprived of its fuel, naturally moves on. You didn't lose. You simply refused to play a game designed for you to lose. There's a deeper Stoic principle buried in this response, and it's called the dichotomy of control. Epictetus divided the entire world into two categories: things within our control and things outside of it. Other people's opinions, their need to be right, their desire to provoke you, none of that is within your control. What is within your control is your own response. When you stop trying to control what someone else believes and focus only on how you respond, you free up an enormous amount of mental energy that was previously being wasted on unwinnable battles. This doesn't mean you're weak or passive. It means you've stopped fighting fires that aren't yours to put out. And ironically, the less you fight, the less power the toxic person has over you, because their entire strategy depends on your emotional investment in winning. It also helps to remember that not every disagreement is actually a disagreement about facts. Many arguments that feel intellectual on the surface are really emotional. Contests in disguise about who gets to feel right, who gets to feel superior, who gets the last word at the dinner table. Once you recognize a conversation for what it actually is, that's an interesting way to see it. Stops feeling like a concession and starts feeling like exactly what it is. A graceful exit from a contest you never needed to enter in the first place. Response number 3. Help me understand what you meant by that. Some of the most toxic comments are delivered as jokes, wrapped in sarcasm, so that if you object, you're accused of not being able to take a joke. This is one of the oldest manipulation tactics in existence. Say something cutting, then hide behind humor if called out. The third response pulls the mask off, gently but firmly. Help me understand what you meant by that. This sentence does something powerful. It refuses to let the comment slide by disguised as a joke. It forces the person to either clarify, which often reveals the cruelty behind their words, or backtrack, because most people who use sarcasm as a weapon aren't prepared to defend their words when directly asked to explain them. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to seek understanding before judgment, to ask what is actually true rather than assuming the worst, or accepting a surface-level explanation. But this same principle, used deliberately, becomes a tool for exposing dishonesty. When you calmly and genuinely ask someone to clarify a backhanded comment, you're not being combative. You're holding up a mirror, and most toxic comments cannot survive being looked at directly. Consider a scenario many people recognize instantly. A friend says, in front of others, "Wow, you're actually eating that whole plate. Good for you, I guess." If you laugh it off, the comment sits there working its damage quietly. If you get defensive, you look thin-skinned. But if you calmly say, "Help me understand what you meant by that," something shifts immediately. The friend either has to admit, out loud, that it was meant as an insult about your body or your choices, which very few people are willing to do in front of others, or they scramble to walk it back with something like, "Oh, I didn't mean anything by it. I was just kidding." Either way, you've won. You haven't raised your voice. You haven't made a scene. You've simply refused to let the comment pass unexamined. This is what the Stoics called living according to reason, rather than reacting according to impulse. It takes practice, because our instinct is either to laugh along or to snap back defensively. But this middle path, calm, curious, direct, takes the sting out of the comment and puts the responsibility back where it belongs, on the person who said it. If this response resonates with you, I'd love to know. Do you have a moment where a backhanded joke really stuck with you? Share it in the comments below. You might be surprised how many people have lived through the exact same thing. There's an important nuance here worth sitting with. This response is not about catching someone in a gotcha moment for the sake of embarrassing them publicly. The tone matters enormously. If you deliver, "Help me understand what you meant by that," with sarcasm or an edge of triumph, you've simply traded one form of aggression for another, and the toxic person gets to reframe you as the one who overreacted. But when it's delivered genuinely curious, almost gently, it becomes something the other person cannot easily fight against, because you haven't given them a target. You've simply asked a question. Questions are notoriously difficult to argue with, because arguing against a question makes you look defensive before you've even said anything of substance. Seneca often wrote about the difference between reacting from strength and reacting from wounded pride. He noted that people who feel secure rarely need to disguise their criticisms as jokes in the first place. The disguise itself is often a sign of someone unwilling to stand fully behind their own words. Understanding this can actually soften your delivery, because you're not trying to punish the person. You're simply refusing to let an unexamined comment slide past unchallenged. Over time, people who rely on this kind of veiled cruelty tend to test their material elsewhere, because with you, the mask always comes off, and most of them aren't prepared to own what's underneath it. Response number 4. I hear you, and I see it differently. There's a specific kind of toxicity that doesn't come from cruelty, but from people who need to be the authority on everything, including your own life, your own choices, your own feelings. They'll tell you how you should feel about your breakup, your job, your parenting, your grief. And when you push back even slightly, they double down, insisting they know better. The fourth response draws a clean, respectful line. I hear you, and I see it differently. This sentence does two things at once. It acknowledges the other person, which prevents an escalation, because most people escalate further when they feel unheard. But it also firmly asserts your own perspective without inviting further debate. It's not an opening for negotiation. It's a closed door delivered politely. This connects to one of the most important and most misunderstood Stoic ideas, the inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius described the mind as a fortress that no external force can breach unless we let down the gates ourselves. Other people can shout, criticize, mock, or insist all they want, but they cannot actually enter your mind and change what you know to be true about your own experience unless you hand them the key. Think of someone going through a difficult divorce, being told by a well-meaning but overbearing relative exactly how they should feel, exactly what they did wrong, exactly what they should do next. For a long time they might absorb every piece of unsolicited judgment as fact, because the relative said it with such confidence. But the moment they started responding with, I hear you, and I see it differently, everything changed. It wasn't rude. It wasn't a fight. It was simply a boundary, a wall around the inner citadel that said, you can have your opinion, but you don't get a vote in my reality. The important thing about this response is what it does to your own physiology, not just the other person's behavior. Every time you assert your perspective calmly, instead of either caving or exploding, you reinforce your own sense of internal authority over your life. You start to believe, on a cellular level, that your read on your own experience matters more than someone else's. confident insistence otherwise. That is not arrogance. That is what the Stoics called self-possession, owning yourself, instead of renting your identity out to whoever argues the loudest. It's worth noting that this response works just as well. With a boss who insists your workload, complaints are unfounded, a friend who insists they know why your relationship really failed, or a parent who insists they understand your career better than you do. The specific topic changes, but the underlying pattern is always the same: someone positioning their opinion as fact and expecting you to either capitulate or fight. "I hear you, and I see it differently" refuses both options. It's neither surrender nor war. It's simply a clear, calm statement of fact. Two people can look at the same situation and arrive at different conclusions, and that disagreement doesn't require a winner. Once you internalize that truth, an enormous number of conversations that used to feel like battles start to feel, instead, like simple, almost boring exchanges of differing opinions. Exactly the kind of low-stakes interaction they should have been all along. Response number 5. What outcome are you looking for here? Some toxic interactions are less about insults and more about chaos. People who complain endlessly, who criticize everything, who seem to enjoy stirring conflict without ever proposing a solution. Talking to them can feel like being pulled into quicksand. The more you engage, the more stuck you become. The 5th response is a simple, almost surgical question. What outcome are you looking for here? This question does something toxic communication patterns cannot survive. It demands purpose. Most complaining for the sake of complaining, or drama for the sake of drama, has no actual destination. When you ask someone what outcome they want, you force the conversation to either become productive, which often ends the toxicity on its own, or you expose that there was never a real goal, just a desire to vent frustration onto you. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius, often discussed the difference between productive conversation and what he essentially described as noise, talk, that goes nowhere and drains everyone involved without producing anything of value. He advised guarding your time as fiercely as you'd guard your money, because time, once spent, cannot be recovered. Every minute spent in a purposeless, toxic exchange is a minute stolen from your actual life. Imagine a coworker who corners you daily with complaints about the company, about management, about everyone else in the office. Always negative, never constructive. For a long time you might nod along, feeling obligated to listen, leaving each conversation more drained than before. But the moment you start asking, calmly and without hostility, what outcome are you looking for here? Do you want to raise this with management, or are you just venting? The entire dynamic shifts. Sometimes people genuinely didn't realize they were just venting on repeat, and the question helps them too. Other times they simply stop coming to you, because their behavior requires an audience that doesn't ask questions. This response also protects something precious: your own emotional bandwidth. You are not obligated to be anyone's unpaid, unlicensed therapist for endless negativity. Setting this boundary through a simple, respectful question is one of the most efficient ways to filter out chronic complainers, without ever needing to confront them directly. There's also a version of this question that works beautifully in family settings, where the complaints are often really control disguised as concern. A parent who repeatedly brings up the same criticism of your life choices, your career, your partner, your parenting style, isn't always looking for a solution. Often the complaint itself is the point. It's a way of maintaining a sense of authority over your decisions long after that authority has stopped being appropriate. Asking gently, what outcome are you hoping for by bringing this up again, doesn't have to be combative. It can be asked with real warmth, but it still does its job. It invites the person to either articulate a genuine, actionable concern or to recognize, even if only privately, that they were repeating a script out of habit rather than love. Either outcome moves the relationship forward. Staying silent and absorbing the same complaint for the 100th time moves nothing forward at all. It simply confirms, to the other person that the pattern still works. Quick pause here. If you're enjoying this breakdown so far, this is exactly the kind of content we make every week on this channel. Hitting subscribe means you won't miss the next one, and it genuinely helps this channel keep making these deep dives into practical Stoicism. Now, let's continue. Because the next response deals with something almost everyone struggles with: people who twist your own words against you. Response number 6. Let's go back to what I actually said. Manipulative people are experts at a tactic psychologists sometimes call moving the goalposts, twisting your original statement into something else entirely, then arguing against that distorted version instead of what you actually said. It's disorienting. You end up defending a position you never took, exhausted and confused about how the conversation even got there. The 6th response cuts straight through the fog. Let's go back to what I actually said. This is a return to first principles, a concept the Stoics valued enormously. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself to strip situations down to their basic, factual elements, removing the emotional exaggeration and distortion that clouds clear thinking. He called this examining things in the light of nature, seeing them plainly without the fog of opinion layered on top. When someone twists your words, the instinct is to keep chasing the distortion, trying to correct every exaggerated claim they've piled on. This is a losing game, because manipulative arguers can generate distortions faster than you can correct them. Instead, this response resets the entire conversation to solid ground. By calmly restating your original words, you refuse to argue against a straw man. You force the conversation back to reality. Consider a scenario where you tell a partner or friend, "I need a little space this weekend to recharge," and they respond with, "So you're saying you don't care about me and you'd rather be alone than spend time with the people who love you?" That is a dramatic distortion of a simple, reasonable statement. Instead of defending yourself against this exaggerated accusation, which only validates it by treating it as worth arguing against, you calmly say, "Let's go back to what I actually said. I said I need some space this weekend. That's it. You're not budging. You're not escalating. You're simply refusing to let the conversation drift into fictional territory." This technique requires discipline, because our natural instinct when accused unfairly is to over-explain, to justify, to prove our innocence in exhaustive detail. But over-explaining is often exactly what manipulative people want. It gives them more material to twist. The Stoic approach is economy of words. State the truth once, clearly, and refuse to be pulled into an endless defense of a distorted narrative. This same pattern shows up constantly in workplace disputes. Imagine raising a simple, reasonable concern to a manager. "I think this deadline is too tight, given the current workload," only to have it reflected back to you a week later as, "So you said you refuse to meet deadlines and don't think the team can handle pressure." The distortion is almost cartoonish when you see it written out. But in the moment, delivered with confidence in a meeting full of people, it can feel disorienting, enough that you start second-guessing your own memory of the conversation. This is sometimes called gaslighting, and one of its most effective countermeasures is exactly this response. Calmly, without anger, restating the original statement word for word, and refusing to engage with the exaggerated version at all. What I actually said was that the deadline felt tight given the workload. That's the concern I'd like us to address. You're not accusing anyone of lying. You're simply anchoring the conversation back to solid, verifiable ground and letting the distortion collapse under its own weight because nobody is willing to fuel it any further. Response number 7, the one-word reframe. Okay. Now we arrive at the response I promised you at the beginning, the one that changes everything, and the one almost nobody uses, because it feels almost too simple to work. And yet, it might be the single most disarming response in this entire list. The word is okay, not sarcastic, not passive-aggressive, just calm, neutral, genuine acknowledgement. and then nothing more. No debate, no defense, no explanation. Here's why this single word is so powerful. Toxic behavior almost always depends on your resistance. Arguments need two sides pulling against each other to generate friction and heat. When someone insults you, criticizes you, or tries to provoke you, and you respond with a flat, calm, okay, you remove your side of the rope entirely. There's nothing left to pull against. The comment simply lands and then dissolves into empty air, because you've declined to give it the emotional charge it needs to survive. This connects to one of the deepest Stoic teachings, amor fati, the love of fate, accepting what happens, including other people's behavior, without wasting energy wishing it were different. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the things that happen to us are like the wind or the rain, not personal, not something to be furious about, simply the nature of things. When someone tries to provoke you, and you respond with acceptance rather than resistance, okay, you're essentially saying, I see what you're doing, I'm not fighting it, and it has no power over me. There's a story about a man named Daniel who dealt for years with a highly critical father. Every visit involved comments about his career, his weight, his choices, his marriage. Nothing was ever good enough. For years he defended himself, explained himself, argued his case, and left every visit emotionally exhausted. On the advice of a therapist, he tried something radical. Whenever his father made a critical comment, Daniel simply said, okay, and changed the subject or continued with what he was doing. No anger, no defensiveness, just acknowledgement and then nothing. Within a few visits, something shifted. His father, who had spent a lifetime getting a reaction, any reaction, from his son, found himself with nothing to grab onto. Some of the criticisms slowed down, not because Daniel convinced his father to change, but because the entire dynamic that fueled the criticism, Daniel's visible frustration, was gone. The behavior had lost its function. This is the deepest secret of Stoic composure. It's not about suppressing your feelings or pretending not to care. It's about genuinely, internally deciding that another person's opinion of you does not get to dictate your emotional state. When that decision is real, not performed, but real, a single word like okay carries more quiet power than the most articulate argument ever could. I want you to try this one specifically this week, just once. Pick a low-stakes moment with someone who tends to provoke you, and simply say, okay, instead of engaging. Then come back and tell me in the comments what happened. I promise you, it will surprise you. Response number 8. I'm not available for this conversation right now. Sometimes the most respectful and powerful thing you can do isn't to respond cleverly at all. It's to decline, to engage in the first place. Toxic conversations often escalate specifically because both people stay in the room, in the chat, on the call, past the point where anything productive can happen. The 8th response draws a boundary around time and space itself. I'm not available for this conversation right now. This isn't the same as walking away in anger or slamming a door. It's a calm, clear statement that removes you from an unproductive dynamic before it spirals further, while leaving the door open for a better conversation later, if one is possible. Epictetus taught something that feels almost radical even today. You are never obligated to participate in a conversation, argument, or interaction that violates your own values or drains your peace, regardless of how the other person reacts to your absence. He compared it to a banquet. You take what nourishes you and pass on what doesn't. Without guilt, and without needing to explain your reasoning to anyone at the table. Think about a heated text exchange that starts reasonably and gradually turns hostile message by message, each one a little sharper than the last. Many of us have stayed in these exchanges far longer than we should have, typing increasingly defensive responses at 11 at night, feeling worse with every message sent. The person who says calmly, "I'm not available for this conversation right now. Let's talk when we're both calmer," and then actually stops typing, has done something enormously difficult and enormously powerful. They've chosen their own peace over the compulsion to have the last word. This is one of the hardest responses on this list to actually execute, because it requires resisting one of the strongest human urges: the need to correct, to clarify, to make sure the other person understands your side before the conversation ends. But the Stoics remind us that some conversations cannot be won in real time, only survived. Removing yourself without hostility is not surrender, it's strategy. It's worth addressing the guilt that often follows this move, because almost everyone feels it the first few times. We're taught, especially those of us raised to be agreeable or conflict avoidant, that ending a conversation before it's resolved is rude, even cowardly. But Seneca made a distinction that's easy to forget in the moment. There is a difference between a conversation that is unfinished and a conversation that has become destructive. Staying in a destructive exchange out of a misplaced sense of obligation doesn't lead to resolution. It usually leads to words neither person can take back. Leaving a bad conversation is not the same as abandoning the relationship. It's simply refusing to let the relationship be defined by its worst 5 minutes. There's also a practical version of this response that works well in professional settings, where flatly saying "I'm not available for this" might feel too blunt. Something like, "I want to give this the attention it deserves, so let's revisit it tomorrow morning when we've both had time to think," accomplishes the same goal with more diplomatic packaging. The substance is identical. You are choosing when and how you engage, rather than being dragged into a reaction on someone else's timeline and someone else's terms. Response number 9. Thank you for your honesty. I'll consider it. Some toxic comments are disguised as feedback. Brutal, unsolicited honesty that seems designed less to help you and more to diminish you, all under the socially acceptable banner of just being real with you. The 9th response takes the sting out completely by accepting the surface framing while denying it any real power. Thank you for your honesty. I'll consider it. This response works because it does exactly what it appears to do. It treats the comment as feedback, as the person claimed it was, while giving you full control over what happens next. You haven't accepted the criticism as truth. You've simply acknowledged that it was said and reserved your own judgment about whether it has any merit. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of testing every impression before accepting it, treating our own first reactions to things, including criticism, as raw, unverified data rather than settled fact. Just because someone delivers a comment with confidence doesn't mean it's accurate. The wise response is to receive the information calmly, examine it later in private, and decide for yourself whether it holds any truth, rather than either rejecting it in anger or absorbing it in shame on the spot. Imagine a mentor or a relative who frequently delivers harsh critiques wrapped in phrases like "I'm just being honest" or "somebody has to tell you the truth." For years, the instinct might be to either argue back defensively or to silently absorb the comment and feel crushed by it for days. The response, "Thank you for your honesty, I'll consider it," does neither. It's genuinely disarming because it denies the critic the emotional reaction, anger or visible hurt, that they may have been seeking, while also quietly reserving the right to disagree entirely once you've actually thought it over privately, on your own terms. Later, alone, you get to ask yourself the real question: is there truth in what was said, or was this really about the other person's need to feel superior? That evaluation belongs to you, and only you, not performed in the moment, under pressure but done later, with a clear head, exactly the way the Stoics recommended, examining every significant impression before granting it your belief. There's a freeing side effect to this response that many people don't expect the first time they use it, because you're no longer required to decide on the spot whether a comment is fair or unfair, true or false. You stop feeling ambushed by criticism. The pressure of the moment evaporates, because you've already told yourself and the other person that judgment will come later, in private, on your own schedule. Some of what's said to you under the banner of honesty will genuinely hold up under that later, calmer scrutiny. And when it does, this approach means you're actually more likely to learn from it, because you engaged with it as information rather than as an attack you had to survive. And some of it won't hold up at all, revealing itself for what it really was, someone else's discomfort, dressed up as concern for you. Either way, you come out ahead because you've replaced a reflexive emotional reaction with a deliberate, examined one. Response number 10, silence, followed by a change of subject. We end where we began, with silence, but this time paired with something additional. The calm, deliberate redirection of the conversation entirely. The 10th and final response is this. Say nothing in reply to the provocation, and simply move the conversation somewhere else. Anyway, how's the new house coming along? So what did you think of the game last night? No acknowledgement of the jab. No visible reaction. Just a smooth pivot, as though the comment never landed. Because, increasingly with practice, it genuinely didn't. This is perhaps the most advanced response on this entire list, because it requires the deepest level of internal mastery. It's not a clever line. It's not a boundary statement. It's a demonstration in real time that someone's attempt to provoke you simply failed to register as significant. Nothing communicates strength more clearly than a person who hears an insult and doesn't even find it worth acknowledging. Marcus Aurelius wrote something remarkable on this exact subject. He said that the best revenge is to not be like the person who wronged you, to simply continue being who you are, unaffected, undeterred, uncorrupted by their behavior, refusing to even engage with a provocation, redirecting instead towards something constructive or pleasant. Is this idea in its purest form? You're not fighting fire with fire. You're simply not fighting at all, because the fire needs your attention to keep burning, and you've declined to give it any. There's something almost unsettling, in a good way, for toxic people when this happens repeatedly. Their comments start to feel like they're falling into a void. No reaction, no argument, no visible effect. Many people who behave this way eventually stop, not because they've had a moral awakening, but because the behavior no longer produces the result they were fishing for. You have effectively become uninteresting to provoke, which, ironically, is one of the most powerful positions you can occupy. A woman named Priya described using this exact approach with a sister-in-law who, at every single family gathering for nearly a decade, made a comment about Priya's choice not to have children. For years, Priya would try to explain her reasoning, defend her marriage, justify a decision that was, frankly, nobody's business but her own and her husband's. Every explanation only seemed to invite a longer, more invasive follow-up question. Eventually, she stopped explaining entirely. The next time the comment came, something like, "Don't you worry you'll regret this someday?" Priya simply said, "Anyway, I heard you're thinking about repainting the kitchen. What colors are you considering?" and turned the conversation elsewhere, warmly, without a trace of coldness in her voice. She did this, gently and consistently, for about a year. The comments about children didn't stop overnight, but they thinned out considerably because Priya had removed the one thing that made the topic worth returning to again and again. Her visible discomfort. Silence, followed by redirection, told her sister-in-law everything she needed to know, without a single confrontation ever taking place. Why this matters more than words. Let's step back for a moment, because I don't want this to feel like just a list of clever comebacks. These 10 responses are really expressions of a much bigger shift. A shift in where you locate your sense of worth and safety. For most of us, somewhere along the way, we were taught, not in words, but through experience, that other people's opinions of us determine our value. A harsh word from a parent, a cruel comment from a classmate. Years of feeling like we had to prove ourselves worthy of basic kindness. And so we grew into adults who flinch at criticism, who replay unkind comments at 2 in the morning, who feel physically smaller in the presence of certain people. The Stoics lived in a world far harsher than most of ours. Epictetus was enslaved for years of his life. physically at the mercy of another human being. And yet he wrote some of the most powerful words on freedom ever recorded, because he understood something that took him a lifetime to master. No one can control your judgments except you. Your leg can be shackled, as his reportedly was. Your reputation can be attacked. Your words can be twisted. But the part of you that decides what all of it means remains, always entirely your own if you choose to claim it. That is what these 10 responses are really teaching. Not how to win arguments, not how to look clever in front of others, but how to walk through a world full of imperfect, sometimes cruel, sometimes careless people, co-workers, family members, even people you love deeply despite their flaws, without handing them the keys to your peace. This doesn't mean becoming cold or detached from everyone around you. It means becoming selective and deliberate about where your emotional energy goes. It means understanding, finally on a bone-deep level, that someone's harsh words say infinitely more about their own unresolved pain, insecurity, or need for control than they say about your worth. Think about the people in your own life who seem to genuinely need to diminish others to feel secure, the relative who can't celebrate anyone else's success without immediately mentioning their own, the co-worker who seems personally wounded by your good news, the friend who turns every conversation back to a contest. Nearly without exception, when you look closely enough, you find someone who is themselves running from a deep, private sense of inadequacy. That doesn't excuse the behavior, and it certainly doesn't mean you owe them endless patience or access to your life. But it does change how their words land once you see them clearly. A punch thrown by someone drowning doesn't need to pull you under with them. You can recognize the struggle, keep your footing, and choose not to take the blow personally, because you understand correctly that it was never really about you in the first place. Marcus Aurelius wrote something along these lines almost every day of his adult life, reminding himself that when someone wrongs him, it's usually because they are mistaken about what is truly good, acting out of their own confusion rather than some accurate verdict on his character. He wasn't excusing cruelty. He was refusing to let someone else's confusion become his own suffering. That distinction between understanding a person's behavior and being controlled by it is the entire foundation of everything we've covered today. If any part of this has resonated with you, if you've recognized someone in your life in one of these stories, or recognized an old version of yourself who didn't have these tools yet, I want you to know that change is genuinely possible. It doesn't happen overnight. The first time you try one of these responses, it might feel unnatural, even scary. That's normal. Courage doesn't feel like confidence in the moment. It feels like doing the right thing while your hands are still shaking. But each time you practice it, it becomes a little more natural, until one day, staying calm in the face of provocation isn't something you have to fight for. It's simply who you are. Practical summary: the 10 responses. Before we close, let's run through all 10 one more time, quickly, so you can carry them with you. 1. The silent pause. Let the comment sit in open air before responding. 2. That's an interesting way to see it. Acknowledge without agreeing or arguing. 3. Help me understand what you meant by that. Pull the mask off hidden cruelty. 4. I hear you, and I see it differently. Assert your perspective without inviting debate. 5. What outcome are you looking for here? Demand purpose from chronic complainers. 6. Let's go back to what I actually said. Refuse to argue against a distorted version of your words. 7. The single word, okay. Remove your side of the rope entirely. 8. I'm not available for this conversation right now. Protect your time and peace directly. 9. Thank you for your honesty. I'll consider it. Accept the framing. Reserve your own judgment. 10. Silence followed by a change of subject. The quiet, ultimate demonstration that provocation simply didn't land. None of these require you to be harsh, cold, or cruel in return. In fact, the opposite is true. Every single one of these responses is rooted in composure, not aggression, because the Stoics understood something that still holds true today. The person who needs to raise their voice has already lost control of the room, while the person who stays calm, no matter what is thrown at them, has quietly won before the exchange even ends. Here's what I want you to remember, walking away from this video. You are not required to accept every opinion, insult, or provocation handed to you by someone else, simply because they said it with confidence or volume. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to redirect. You are allowed to say okay and mean it fully, without a single trace of resentment underneath. That is not weakness. That is the exact kind of quiet, unshakable strength that built empires, that carried enslaved men to philosophical greatness, that has helped ordinary people, in ordinary kitchens and ordinary offices, reclaim their peace one calm response at a time. If this video gave you even one tool you didn't have 20 minutes ago, that's exactly why this channel exists. Hit that like button and it genuinely helps other people struggling with the exact same toxic dynamics find this video when they need it most. Drop a comment below and tell me which response you're going to try first, or which toxic person in your life you're already picturing while you type. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics, because we release new videos just like this one, built on the same timeless principles every single week. One last thought before you go. None of these 10 responses were invented to make you unbeatable in arguments, or to turn you into someone who never feels hurt again. That's not what Stoicism promises, and it's not what this channel is about. You will still feel the sting of an unkind word sometimes. You will still have moments where an old pattern takes over and you snap back before you remember any of this. That's not failure. That's being human, and even Marcus Aurelius, writing these exact reminders to himself night after night, needed to write them precisely, because he wasn't naturally immune to frustration either. The goal was never perfection. It was practice, slowly, deliberately, choosing the calmer response a little more often than yesterday, and trusting that over months and years, that small daily practice reshapes not just how you respond to difficult people, but how safe and steady you feel inside your own mind, regardless of what anyone else says or does around you. Until next time, stay calm, stay unshakable, and remember, the wisest people in history didn't win their battles by shouting the loudest. They won by never needing to shout at all.